I was standing in the hallway outside my wife's neurologist's office at Northside Hospital when the visiting nurse from the home health agency stepped off the elevator and walked straight toward me, like she'd been looking for me specifically. She came to our house every other Thursday to check Miriam's vitals and log her progress. I'd always liked her. Steady, professional, no nonsense. That Thursday afternoon, she was none of those things. She was scared. "Mr. Crawford," she said, keeping her voice low, "I need to show you something before you go back in there. Something I found this morning when I was reviewing your wife's baseline records." I told her I was listening. She didn't say anything else in the hallway. She pulled me into an empty consultation room down the hall, closed the door, and set her tablet on the table between us. There were two side-by-side charts, my wife's cognitive test scores. "These are from last Tuesday," she said, pointing to the left column. "Miriam scored in the moderate dementia range, memory gaps, word retrieval problems, disorientation. This is what she's been showing us every visit for the past 5 months. Then she pointed to the right column. "These are from this morning, 2.5 days into her hospital stay for that kidney infection. She scored in the mild cognitive impairment range, nearly 2 full stages better, in 60 hours. I said I didn't understand what that meant. "Mr. Crawford, genuine Alzheimer's and most forms of progressive dementia don't reverse. Not in 60 hours, not ever. But certain medications, when they stop being administered, can allow a person's cognition to clear significantly in that window." She paused. "I've been a nurse for 19 years. I've seen this twice before. Both times the patient was being kept sedated at home, slowly, over a long period, in small enough doses to look like disease progression." My hand found the back of the chair, and I held on to it. "I'm not here to make accusations," she said. "But I've already called the hospital's social work team, and they've contacted Adult Protective Services. There's a detective from the Fulton County Sheriff's Office who handles elder abuse cases. She wants to speak with you today." I told her that my wife had been officially diagnosed with early-onset Alzheimer's by 2 separate neurologists, that we'd done the MRIs, the PET scans, the spinal fluid analysis. She looked at me with the kind of patience people develop when they've had to deliver unbearable news more than once. "Those tests can look inconclusive when the real cause is chemical," she said, "especially with benzodiazepines. Long-term low-dose sedation mimics dementia in nearly every measurable way. The plaques don't appear, but the cognitive decline does. And unless someone specifically tests for chronic benzo use, which almost nobody orders unless they're already looking for it, it goes completely undetected." She wrote a number on the back of a business card and slid it across the table. "Her name is Detective Simmons. Call her before you go home today, and Mr. Crawford, don't tell anyone at your house that we talked. Comment where you're watching from and what time it is right now, because on that Thursday afternoon in Atlanta, I thought I was just a tired husband, trying to understand why the sharpest woman I'd ever known couldn't remember what she'd eaten for breakfast. I had no idea I was standing at the entrance to the worst thing that has ever happened to my family. My name is Harvey Crawford, and at 67 years old, I'd spent 4 decades building something I was proud of. I started as a civil engineer with the city of Atlanta, straight out of Georgia Tech, worked that job for 22 years, saved every dollar I didn't spend, and used my nights and weekends to buy my first rental property in East Point when I was 34, a 2-bedroom house that needed new plumbing and a coat of paint, and a landlord willing to fix problems without being asked. By the time I retired at 58, I owned 11 properties across the metro area. Single-family homes, a small apartment complex in College Park, 2 commercial units on Cascade Road, nothing flashy, just steady, honest work compounding over time. But none of that, not 1 square foot of it, meant anything compared to Miriam. We married when we were both 28. She was finishing her master's in education administration at Spelman, and I was already 2 years into the city job. She became a teacher, then a vice principal, then the principal of Mays High School in southwest Atlanta, where she ran that building like it was her personal mission to make sure every kid who walked through those doors had someone in their corner. She retired at 62, 2 years before everything started falling apart. For 38 years, Miriam was the most clear-headed person I knew. The woman didn't forget anything. She remembered the name of every student she'd ever had. She kept our finances in her head like a calculator. She could tell when I was lying before I'd finished the sentence. So when she started forgetting things, really forgetting, not just misplacing keys, I noticed immediately. It started about 8 months before that day in the hospital hallway. Little things first. She put the car keys in the freezer twice in the same week. She called our daughter by the wrong name 3 times in one conversation. She stopped finishing sentences, like the words dissolved before she could reach them. We saw her primary care doctor, then a neurologist, then a specialist at Emory. The MRI showed some cortical thinning consistent with early-stage neurodegeneration. The cognitive testing put her in the mild to moderate range. They said it was early-onset Alzheimer's, probable, and they gave us a folder of resources and a prescription, and sent us home. I didn't sleep for a week after that diagnosis. Our son, Aaron, 33, sharp kid, worked in tech sales, had moved back into our guest house 6 months before Miriam's symptoms started getting serious. He'd left a good job at a software company in Austin to launch his own startup, and when the funding fell through, he and his wife came back to Atlanta to regroup. His wife, Ingrid, had been a pharmaceutical sales representative for 8 years before she was let go in a company restructuring. She was 31, ambitious, educated, graduated from UGA, knew the healthcare industry the way I knew load-bearing calculations. Miriam hadn't been warm to Ingrid since the beginning. She never said it outright, not in front of Aaron, but she'd told me privately, more than once. "That woman watches me," Miriam said one evening, maybe 2 months after they'd moved into the guest house. We were sitting on the back porch, and I'd asked her why she'd been quieter than usual at dinner. "Not the way family watches you. The way someone watches something they're waiting to have." I told her she was reading into things. "Harvey, I spent 30 years reading people for a living. I know the difference between affection and appraisal. That girl looks at me the way a real estate agent looks at a house she's already decided to list." I told Miriam she was being unfair. Ingrid had been nothing but helpful, cooking meals so Miriam didn't have to stand too long, managing her medications and supplement schedule, driving her to appointments when I had to be at a property. She was attentive, organized, and Aaron was happy. I told myself that Miriam's suspicion was a symptom of the disease. That is the thing that will stay with me longest. I told myself that my wife's clearest perception was a symptom of her illness. 4 months into their stay, Ingrid had taken over preparing almost everything Miriam consumed. The morning smoothies, packed with supplements she'd researched, she said. The evening chamomile tea, the little dish of medications and vitamins she set out every night before bed, arranged like she'd been doing it for years. She was thorough, she was attentive, she was always right there. And my wife was getting worse by the month. Detective Simmons met me in a conference room at the Northside Medical Complex that same afternoon. She was a compact woman in her mid-40s, with close-cropped hair and reading glasses she pushed up her nose before looking at anything on paper. She didn't waste my time with pleasantries. She showed me the preliminary lab report. When the attending physician had ordered a full metabolic panel for Miriam's kidney infection, a flag had come back on the results. Elevated levels of lorazepam in her system. Not at toxic levels, but consistent with regular administration over an extended period. "Miriam is not prescribed lorazepam," the detective said. "She was never prescribed anything like that. I confirmed. Lorazepam is a benzodiazepine. At low doses administered consistently over time, it causes exactly what your wife has been presenting: cognitive slowing, memory disruption, word-finding difficulty, fatigue, balance problems. It's clinically indistinguishable from dementia progression without specific testing, and no one orders that test unless they're already suspicious. I gripped the edge of the table. Someone has been giving it to her, regularly, over months. The levels are consistent with daily administration, carefully calibrated to produce impairment without causing acute distress that would raise alarms. I knew. Before she said another word, I knew. The smoothies, the tea. The dish of vitamins Ingrid arranged every night with the quiet efficiency of someone who had rehearsed the motion 1,000 times. My daughter-in-law, I said. She prepares everything my wife eats and drinks. We can't make that determination yet, Detective Simmons said. We need evidence, but I want you to think carefully about motive. If Miriam were to be found legally incapacitated, if someone petitioned for guardianship, what would that mean for your estate? I sat back. I had a will. Everything split between Aaron and our daughter, who lived in Portland. But if Miriam were judged incompetent, someone could petition to become her legal guardian, which would give them decision-making authority over her healthcare, her finances, full legal control over a woman who owned her half of an 11-property portfolio worth just over $3.5 million. And Ingrid had been asking questions about the properties for months. Casual questions. What was the vacancy rate on the College Park units? Whether I'd considered putting the commercial properties into an LLC before something happened to me. Had we updated our estate documents since the diagnosis? I'd thought she was just being thorough. She'd worked around healthcare and insurance long enough to know these things mattered. She was being helpful. She was mapping the terrain. Detective Simmons laid out the plan. A small camera installed in our kitchen, focused on the counter where the morning smoothies were prepared. A pull of Ingrid's recent purchase and pharmacy records, a monitor on our home network for any communications relevant to the case. And I would go home, act as if nothing had changed, and let the investigation run. What about my son? I asked. Does he know any of this? We're going to find out. Right now, there's no indication he's involved, but I need you to operate on the assumption that anything you tell him reaches her within the hour. Can you do that? I drove home that evening with Miriam in the passenger seat. Already more present than she'd been in months, her brain beginning to clear now that she was away from whatever was in her food. And I held her hand on the center console and said nothing about any of it. That was the hardest drive of my life. That night, after Aaron and Ingrid had gone back to the guest house, I sat on the edge of our bed and told Miriam the truth. I couldn't not tell her. She had always been my partner in everything, and she deserved to know why I was about to ask her to pretend. She listened without interrupting. When I finished, she was quiet for a long time. Then she said, "I told you she was watching me." "You did," I said. "And you told me I was imagining it because I was sick." She wasn't angry. Her voice was very still. "Harvey, she made me sick." I reached for her hand and she let me take it. "How long?" she asked. 8 months, maybe more. She closed her eyes. I watched her absorb that. 8 months of her mind being stolen from her piece by piece, deliberately, by someone who sat at her dinner table and called her mom. When she opened her eyes again, they were dry. "Then we catch her," Miriam said, "and we don't make any mistakes." The cameras went up the next day, installed by a county tech, while Ingrid and Aaron were out running errands. Detective Simmons called me 3 days later with the pharmacy records. Ingrid had opened a Good RX account under a variation of her middle name. Over the past 10 months, she'd filled prescriptions at 4 different pharmacies across the metro area. using a combination of telehealth prescriptions she'd obtained through an online service and, according to the investigator, additional quantities sourced through contacts she'd retained from her pharmaceutical sales career. She knew the distribution channels. She knew the dosing thresholds. She knew exactly how to stay invisible inside a system she'd worked in for 8 years. And then the kitchen camera caught her. 6:45 in the morning. Everyone else was asleep. Ingrid came into our kitchen in her robe and moved to the counter, where she began preparing Miriam's breakfast smoothie. She worked from memory: the blueberries, the almond milk, the protein powder. And then she reached into the pocket of her robe and removed a small prescription bottle. She tapped a measured amount of white powder into the blender with the practiced ease of someone who has done something hundreds of times. She rinsed the bottle, dried it, put it back in her pocket, blended everything for 45 seconds, poured it into Miriam's glass, covered it with plastic wrap and set it in the refrigerator. She had done this every single morning, in my kitchen, while I slept 10 feet away. But Detective Simmons wasn't finished. 2 days after we had the footage, she called me into her office and played me a recorded phone call. Ingrid had called her sister in Savannah, and the call had been captured through the monitoring warrant on our home network. "The neurologist is recommending a guardianship evaluation," Ingrid's voice said. Relaxed, conversational, like she was discussing where to go for brunch. "Once that goes through, I file the petition. Harvey doesn't have the legal standing to contest it if the court determines she needs a guardian, especially with the diagnosis already on record." Her sister said, "And Harvey has no idea any of this is happening." "Harvey thinks I'm helping," Ingrid said. "He's always thought I was helping. By the time he figures out anything's wrong, she'll be in memory care and I'll have conservatorship over her accounts. The properties alone are worth $3.5 million. Aaron inherits half. We file for divorce 2 years after she's gone, citing marital breakdown. I walk with at least $1.5 million. Probably closer to 2. Ingrid, that is. That's estate planning, she said simply. Just more creative than most people bother with. I had to set the phone down on the detective's desk. I stood in that office for a full minute without moving or speaking. "That's estate planning," said the way you'd describe rebalancing a 401 neng. She had spent 10 months methodically dismantling my wife's mind with the patience and clinical precision of a financial instrument. Not out of rage, not out of desperation. A plan, drawn up and executed with the same professional methodology she'd once used to sell medications to physicians who trusted her word. I thought about Miriam sitting at our kitchen table that morning, struggling to remember the name of the street she'd grown up on, while the woman making her breakfast already knew exactly how this was going to end. "We move," I said. "I am done waiting." We did it at dinner, my idea. I called Aaron that afternoon and told him Miriam was feeling strong and wanted to cook for the family. That was true. When Miriam learned we were ready, something came back into her eyes that I hadn't seen in 8 months. Not just relief. Resolve. She made her mother's pot roast, the one she'd been making since before Aaron was born. Mashed potatoes from scratch. Green beans with smoked turkey. She moved slowly. Months of sedation don't vanish overnight, and she was still in recovery. But she wouldn't let me help. She said she needed to do this herself. We sat at the dining room table, all 4 of us. Ingrid poured sweet tea for everyone and told a story about running into an old colleague at the Whole Foods on Ponce and laughed at all the right places. She was warm, composed, completely present. If I hadn't watched the footage with my own eyes, if I hadn't heard her voice on that recording, I might have looked at her across that table and believed everything she was performing. Halfway through the meal, I heard a car pull up out front. "I'll get the door," I said. Detective Simmons and 2 officers from the Fulton County Sheriff's Office were standing on the front porch. Aaron stood up when he saw them come in. His face went through confusion, then alarm, then something that looked like his brain trying to run two separate programs at the same time.
Ingrid Hollins,
Detective Simmons said, stepping around the table. You are under arrest for elder abuse by means of chemical sedation, criminal administration of a controlled substance without a valid prescription, and conspiracy to commit financial fraud through exploitation of a disabled adult. Ingrid went completely still, not surprised, not confused. She looked at the detective the way someone looks at a problem they've already begun to calculate a solution to. Aaron said, What is this, Dad? There has to be a mistake, tell them. Son, I said, sit down. Detective Simmons set a laptop on the table. She played the kitchen footage first. 6:45 in the morning. The prescription bottle, the practiced motion, the smoothie going into the blender. Aaron watched it with his mouth slightly open, his eyes moving from the screen to his wife and back, as though his brain couldn't make the two images occupy the same reality. Then she played the phone call. That's estate planning, Ingrid's voice said, easy as talking about the weather. Aaron made a sound I won't try to describe. He turned to look at his wife. Is that you? He asked, like some part of him was still holding out for the answer to be no. Ingrid said nothing. The performance was finished. Underneath it was something I don't have a word for. Not shame, not remorse, just the blank recalibration of someone deciding their next move. Is that your voice, Ingrid? She looked at him for the first time all evening, and for just a second, something in her face shifted. You were never supposed to know any of this, she said. You would have been fine. You would have had money, and I would have handled everything, and you would have been completely fine. An officer stepped forward with handcuffs. I would have been fine, Aaron said quietly. My mother, you were killing my mother. Miriam, who had sat perfectly still through all of it, set down her fork. She looked at the woman who had spent 10 months systematically stealing her mind, her clarity, her sense of self, who had sat in her home and called her mum, and brought her smoothies every single morning, and watched her decline with professional satisfaction. When they let you out, Miriam said, her voice as steady as I have ever heard it, you will be an old woman. Think about that on the hard days. They walked Ingrid out the front door. She didn't look back at any of us. The house went quiet in the way it does when something irreversible has just happened. Aaron sat at the table with tears running down his face. He looked like he'd been hollowed out from the inside. I didn't know, he finally said. Dad, I swear to God I didn't know. I thought she was taking care of her. I thought she loved this family. She loved what this family has, Miriam said. She moved to the chair beside him the same way she used to move toward students who were struggling in the hallway at Mays High, with a particular quietness that made you feel like the only person in the room. You didn't do this. She used your trust the way she used everything else as a tool. That is not your sin. That is entirely hers. Aaron put his face in his hands. I sat across from them and watched my wife, who had spent 8 months being sedated into confusion, who had watched her own mind fog over without being able to explain why, who had known from the very beginning that something was wrong and had been told she was imagining it. I watched her comfort the son who had unknowingly slept every night beside the person doing it to her. I have never felt more inadequate in my life, and I have never been more proud of her. The trial came 5 months later. Ingrid's attorney argued that she'd obtained the medication for her own anxiety and that trace cross-contamination in a shared kitchen could account for the levels found in Miriam's system. The jury heard 10 months of pharmacy records under a false name. They saw 6 separate recordings of deliberate, measured administration. They listened to the phone call with her sister played twice during closing arguments. They deliberated for 4 hours. Ingrid was convicted on all 3 counts. The judge sentenced her to 18 years, with a minimum of 12 before any parole eligibility. Aaron filed for divorce before the sentence was formally announced. He moved into an apartment in Decatur and took a job managing operations for a non-profit that provides financial literacy education in underserved communities across metro Atlanta. The salary is less than his old corporate life. He told me the work feels like something real for the first time in years. I believe him. Miriam's recovery was not instant, but it was real and it was remarkable. Within 6 weeks of being home with a new care team that reported directly to her physician, her cognitive scores had climbed back into the mild impairment range. Within 4 months, she was testing in the normal range for her age. The neurologists at Emory used words like atypical and unexpected resolution, and I didn't press them on what they'd missed, because what mattered was that she was coming back. By last spring, she was back at the Mays High alumni events, mentoring the new principal by name and finishing every sentence she started. One evening in early fall, I came home to find her on the back porch with a letter in her lap. It was from the prison, forwarded through the victim's advocate office. Ingrid had written requesting permission to correspond with Aaron. The letter to Miriam described personal growth and accountability, and a desire to understand the harm she had caused. Miriam read it twice. Then she folded it carefully and set it on the side table next to her iced tea. "What are you going to do?" I asked. She was quiet a moment. "I'm going to write her back," she said, "not because she deserves it, and not because I've finished forgiving her. I haven't. Forgiveness isn't something you arrive at. It's something you work toward, and I'm still in the middle of that work. But I will not let her take anything else from me. She took 8 months of my mind. She doesn't get my character on top of it." She looked out at the yard. As for Aaron, what he decides about his own healing is between him and God. I just told him, don't be in a hurry. You don't owe anyone your forgiveness before you're ready to give it. Last month, our whole family had dinner at the house. Aaron brought a lemon pound cake he'd baked himself. He's taken to baking since the divorce. Says it helps him think. Our daughter drove up from Portland with her husband and our grandchildren, who spent an hour following Miriam through the garden and mostly just pulling things out of the ground they weren't supposed to touch. Miriam chased them away from her tomatoes with a garden hose and laughed so hard she had to sit down. After the grandkids went to sleep, Aaron and I sat out on the back porch. One of those Atlanta September evenings that remind you why people never actually leave this city. "Dad," he said after a while, "when all of this was happening, did you think I might be part of it?" I'd promised myself I would be honest with him. For about a day I didn't know. I hated myself for wondering, but I didn't know. He nodded slowly. He didn't seem hurt by it. I would have wondered too. We sat a while without talking. "I think about what Mom knew," he said. Something was wrong with Ingrid from the beginning. She told you, and neither of us listened." He paused. "How do you live with that?" I thought about it. By not making the same mistake twice, and by making sure other people don't have to learn it the way we did. He put his hand on my shoulder. "I don't blame you, Dad. I was married to her, and I didn't see it either. Here is what I know now that I did not know before all of this. The person being harmed is almost always the first one to sense it. Before the toxicology flag, before the surveillance footage, before the recorded phone call, Miriam knew. She told me something was wrong. She told me she was being watched in a way that didn't feel like love. She told me a year before we had a single piece of evidence that the woman she was supposed to trust with her care was not what she appeared to be, and I explained away every warning she gave me, because the alternative, that someone inside our home, someone who called my wife Mom, could be executing a plan this deliberate and this cold, was too uncomfortable to sit with. Don't do what I did. When the person who loves you most tells you something is wrong, the loving response is not to reassure them. The loving response is to take them seriously, especially when everyone else is telling you they're fine. There is one more thing I need to say. Family is not a status you're granted when you marry into a name. It is something you earn in the small, unglamorous actions of every ordinary day. Ingrid had the ring and the last name and the guest house key and a seat at every table we set. But she was never family. She was calculating, and the people who were actually family. Aaron sitting in a hospital chair for 3 nights straight. Our daughter driving 18 hours without being asked. The visiting nurse who could have filed a report and stepped back, but instead made sure I understood what she was telling me and why. Those are the people who showed me what that word actually means. Before you go, I want to ask you something. Have you ever had someone in your life, someone everyone around you trusted completely, someone you'd opened your home to, where something in you said, wait? A question they asked that was a little too specific. An interest in your finances that felt more like research than conversation. A kindness that was performed rather than given. Did you listen to that feeling? Or did you talk yourself out of it? The way I talked myself out of everything, Miriam tried to tell me. Tell me your story in the comments. Because someone reading this right now may need to hear it more than they need to hear mine. If this story meant something to you, please hit subscribe for Voices of Uncle Russell and share it with someone you love. Miriam's in the kitchen right now reorganizing my spice cabinet, a project she undertakes about every 6 months and which I silently undo within a week. Tonight I'm going to leave it exactly the way she wants it. She's here, she's sharp, she's right about most things and she knows it. That is more than enough for me.